Inside the human body, beneath the fragile shell of the human skull, lies the most extraordinary and enigmatic machine in the known universe, the human brain. It is a soft, intricate organ, weighing less than 1.5 kilograms. Yet it holds more power than any supercomputer ever built. Within its billions of neurons sparks the ability to imagine entire worlds, compose music that stirs the soul, and solve problems no one has ever dared to confront. In moments of inspiration, it can transform an ordinary mind into a wellspring of genius. In moments of desperation, it can rewire itself to keep us alive against impossible odds. And yet, for all its brilliance, the brain is also capable of producing unfathomable darkness. Science tells us that we have only begun to scratch the surface of understanding this organ's true capabilities. We know it governs our every thought, memory, and emotion. We know it can adapt, heal, and learn in ways that seem to defy logic. But history is filled with stories that push beyond the boundaries of science, tales of people surviving devastating injuries that should have been fatal, of ordinary individuals waking up from accidents with extraordinary abilities, of minds that can seemingly peer into the future or perceive events unfolding miles away. What makes these stories so compelling is that they reveal both the wonder and the danger of unlocking the brain's full potential. The same mechanism that produces compassion, art, and innovation can also give rise to cruelty, obsession, and destruction. For every story of miraculous genius, there is another of chilling darkness. And somewhere in between lies the truth, an intricate balance of light and shadow that shapes who we are. This is not just a journey into science, but into the deepest mysteries of the human experience. As we explore the brain's hidden power, we will uncover stories that inspire awe, provoke fear, and challenge everything we think we know about ourselves. From the moment a human life begins, the brain is already a marvel of hidden capabilities. In the womb, before the first breath is taken, the neural network begins forming connections at a staggering pace, up to 1 million new synapses every single second. By the time a baby is born, the brain already contains the raw architecture for a lifetime of learning, creativity, and adaptation. One of the most striking demonstrations of this potential lies in the ability of newborns to recognize sound. At birth, an infant can distinguish over 800 distinct phonetic sounds, the full range used in every spoken language on Earth. This means a newborn in Tokyo has the same innate ability to hear and process the unique tones of Swahili as a baby in Nairobi can detect the subtle inflections of Japanese. It is a universal gift, one that suggests our brains are born with the capacity to adapt to any culture, any environment, any tongue. But this gift is fleeting. As the months pass, the brain begins to prune its connections, preserving only the sounds it hears most frequently. By the end of the first year, an infant raised in an English-speaking environment may lose the ability to easily distinguish certain tones common in Mandarin, while a baby in China may no longer hear the difference between sounds that are distinct in English. This process, known as synaptic pruning, is the brain's way of becoming efficient. It chooses to specialize, to focus its energy on what it perceives as most useful for survival in the immediate world. While pruning makes the brain more efficient, it also reveals an unsettling truth. Much of our inborn potential is lost simply because it goes unused. What might happen if we could retain that original flexibility throughout life? Could we master multiple languages with ease? Could we adapt to new skills and technologies in ways that today seem impossible? Some scientists believe that traces of this early adaptability remain hidden deep within the adult brain. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, offers tantalizing hints that lost abilities might be revived under the right conditions. Experiments with language immersion, memory training, and even brain stimulation have shown that adults can sometimes regain capabilities once thought to be permanently closed off after childhood. This raises a fascinating question. If our brains are born with such boundless capacity, why do we accept the idea that aging inevitably limits us? And what if moments of crisis, trauma, injury, or extreme challenge could unlock abilities long buried, just as they do in rare but extraordinary cases? It is in exploring these moments of crisis that we begin to see the other side of the brain's potential, not just in what we are born with, but in how the mind can adapt when survival is at stake. The adaptability of the brain is never more astonishing than when it is pushed to the edge of survival. In moments when life hangs by the thinnest thread, this organ can summon resources that defy conventional science, rewiring itself, rerouting signals, and sustaining functions thought impossible under the circumstances. One of the most famous cases in medical history is that of Phineas Gage, a 25-year-old railroad foreman in 1848. Gage was known for his strength, precision, and sharp mind, qualities essential in an era when railroads were carved through mountains by sheer manpower. But on a September afternoon in Vermont, an explosion meant to clear rock turned into a freak accident. A heavy iron tamping rod, over a meter long and 3 centimeters thick, was blasted upward with the force of a cannon. It entered Gage's left cheek, passed through his brain, and exited the top of his skull, landing several meters away, coated in blood and brain tissue. By all logic, Gage should have died instantly. Yet to the shock of his crew, he not only survived but was able to speak within minutes. He walked to a nearby cart, sat upright during the ride into town, and reportedly greeted his doctor with a calm, coherent description of what had happened. The injury had destroyed much of his frontal lobe, yet the rest of his brain adapted almost instantly to keep him alive. However, survival came at a cost. Those who knew Gage before the accident described him as responsible, courteous, and disciplined. Afterward, he became impulsive, irritable, and prone to fits of anger. It was as if a different man had emerged, his memories intact, but his personality altered beyond recognition. This drastic change provided one of the earliest insights into how specific brain regions influence behavior, decision-making, and emotion. Gage's story is not unique. Modern medicine has documented countless cases of the brain defying expectations. In some instances, individuals have recovered full function despite losing entire hemispheres of the brain, a surgical procedure called hemispherectomy, often performed to stop severe epilepsy in children. Within months, the remaining half of the brain reorganizes itself, taking over motor skills, language, and even spatial reasoning that should have been lost forever. There are also accounts of people who survive massive strokes, yet develop extraordinary new skills in the aftermath. Some awaken with an uncanny ability to paint or compose music, while others experience heightened memory or mathematical abilities. These transformations are rare, but they suggest that the brain may hold backup systems that only activate under extreme conditions. What makes these survival stories so profound is that they reveal both the brain's fragility and its resilience. A single injury can change a person forever, yet that same injury can trigger adaptations that border on the miraculous. The organ is constantly seeking ways to preserve life, even if it means reshaping identity in the process. And this leads to an even more mysterious phenomenon: cases where the brain doesn't just adapt for survival, but unlocks abilities that were never present before. It is here that science begins to overlap with something almost supernatural, a transformation that seems to transcend the limits of biology. If survival can awaken dormant abilities, then there are moments when the brain goes even further, unlocking a brilliance that was never apparent before. In rare and baffling cases, head trauma, illness, or neurological events have transformed ordinary individuals into savants, gifted with skills that seem to appear overnight. Scientists call it acquired savant syndrome, and it challenges our understanding of where human talent truly comes from. One of the most striking examples is the story of Derek Amato, a man with no formal musical training. In 2006, during a weekend visit with friends, Derek dove into the shallow end of a swimming pool and struck his head on the concrete floor. The impact caused a severe concussion and partial hearing loss. In the days that followed, Derek struggled with headaches, memory gaps, and dizziness, but something unexpected also began to emerge: an irresistible urge to sit at a piano. When he placed his fingers on the keys, Derek found that he could play complex, flowing compositions he had never studied or practiced. Musical patterns seemed to pour from his mind fully formed, as if he were remembering rather than inventing them. He described seeing black and white shapes in his vision, guiding his hands across the keyboard. These shapes, he said, represented musical structures, a kind of internal language that bypassed traditional learning entirely. Medical scans revealed that Derek's brain injury had altered activity in certain regions associated with creativity, memory, and motor control. But no scan could explain why the accident had unlocked this precise ability, or why it manifested in such an advanced, intuitive form. Derek's case is not isolated. Across the world, there are accounts of people who, after accidents, suddenly develop mastery in art, mathematics, linguistics, or spatial reasoning. A man struck by lightning becomes a piano virtuoso. A stroke survivor gains the ability to draw detailed architectural sketches from memory. A woman recovering from brain surgery discovers she can fluently speak a language she had only briefly studied years before. One theory suggests that these abilities are not new at all, but rather buried within the brain's vast network. Inaccessible under normal conditions, trauma, in disrupting normal neural pathways, may force the brain to reroute signals through dormant areas, accidentally unlocking a hidden reservoir of skill. Another, more controversial idea is that such abilities may stem from subconscious memories, even ancestral knowledge encoded in our DNA. What makes these stories unsettling is the implication that extraordinary talent might be latent in all of us, waiting for some extreme event to break the lock. But if this is true, it raises haunting questions. Why does the brain keep such gifts hidden? And at what cost do we force them to the surface? For every case of an accidental genius, there are countless others where injury brings only loss. The fine line between unlocking potential and unleashing chaos is razor thin. And history has shown that, in some cases, the mind's transformation is not toward creativity or brilliance, but toward something far darker. Genius, in its purest form, is a force of creation. It can compose symphonies, design inventions, and solve problems that change the world. But the same machinery that fuels genius can also be twisted into something destructive. Intelligence, when coupled with obsession, isolation, or moral detachment, can transform the mind into a weapon. The history of human civilization is littered with brilliant minds who used their gifts not to illuminate, but to control, manipulate, and destroy. One of the most unsettling truths about the brain is that heightened intelligence often comes with heightened complexity of thought, and complexity can turn inward, feeding dangerous compulsions. Consider the case of William Sidis, often cited as one of the smartest humans who ever lived, with an IQ estimated between 250 and 300. Sidis could read the New York Times at 18 months old and entered Harvard at the age of 11. But as he grew older, his intellect became a burden. He withdrew from society, grew paranoid, and developed bizarre obsessions that consumed his life. While Sidis harmed no one directly, his story is a cautionary tale of how extreme cognitive ability can isolate the mind from reality. More sinister are the examples of highly intelligent criminals and manipulators, those who use deep psychological insight not to heal, but to exploit. History has seen cult leaders with uncanny charisma, capable of bending entire communities to their will. Their understanding of human fears, desires, and weaknesses allows them to orchestrate events with chilling precision. In such cases, intelligence becomes a form of predation. Neuroscience offers a grim explanation. The brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and impulse control, can be extraordinarily sharp and strategizing while emotionally disconnected. When empathy is absent, intelligence loses its moral anchor. A person may calculate outcomes flawlessly, yet see human life as nothing more than variables in an equation. Some of the most extreme examples are found in the rare but disturbing phenomenon of acquired psychopathy. In certain documented cases, brain injuries, particularly to the frontal lobe, have transformed previously kind, law-abiding individuals into cold, remorseless predators. Their IQ remains intact, sometimes even enhanced in strategic thinking, but their moral compass is shattered. Then there is the darker mystery that has long haunted philosophers, criminologists, and spiritual thinkers alike. Does genius naturally carry a shadow? For every Leonardo da Vinci, there is a mind like the Unabomber's Ted Kaczynski, someone whose intellectual brilliance spirals into isolation, paranoia, and violence. Are these simply anomalies, or are they signs that the brain, when pushed beyond certain limits, risks destabilizing itself? Paranormal lore adds an even more chilling layer to this question. Throughout history, there are whispered accounts of individuals who, after a sudden surge of intellectual or creative power, descend into madness, Some claim to hear voices guiding their work, voices that grow more demanding and malevolent over time. In such stories, intelligence is not just a personal trait, it becomes a channel for something beyond the self. Something that may not have the mind's best interests at heart. Modern science would dismiss these accounts as symptoms of mental illness. But even here, the boundary is blurry. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and other conditions have been linked to bursts of creative brilliance alongside destructive behavior. The same neural pathways that generate novel ideas can, under strain, produce delusions, paranoia, and obsession. The result is a dangerous fusion: creativity without restraint, intellect without empathy. And yet, the most disturbing part of this dark side is not found in history books or psychiatric case files. It lies dormant in every human brain. Under the right combination of stress, isolation, trauma, or chemical imbalance, the same organ that paints masterpieces and writes great novels could devise elaborate schemes of harm. The mind is not inherently good or evil, it is a tool. And like any tool, its purpose depends on the hand, and the will, that guides it. The question, then, is not just how far intelligence can take us, but whether we can survive what we become when its shadows take control. And as the next chapter will reveal, there are cases where the brain's gifts cross over into something that feels less like a human trait, and more like an intrusion from a place we cannot explain. Science has given us many answers about the brain, but there remains a territory where the instruments of laboratories fall silent. This is the realm where memory feels like premonition, where thoughts seem to reach beyond the body, and where the dead whisper in dreams. It is here, in this shadowed corner of human consciousness, that the paranormal mind resides. For centuries, mystics, shamans, and visionaries have claimed the brain is not merely a biological machine but a receiver, an antenna tuned to frequencies beyond the physical world. While modern neuroscience frames consciousness as a product of neural activity, these traditions suggest the opposite, that the brain is a gateway, filtering and translating a vast ocean of unseen information. Consider the phenomenon of remote viewing, popularized during the Cold War. In classified experiments, individuals claimed to perceive distant locations or hidden objects without any physical contact. Some produced descriptions so accurate that intelligence agencies quietly invested years of research into the possibility. Critics dismissed it as coincidence or clever guesswork, but the persistence of such studies hints at something science could not entirely dismiss. Equally unsettling are the stories of terminal lucidity, cases where patients deep in dementia or coma suddenly regain full clarity and speak coherently in their final hours. Doctors have no explanation for how a brain ravaged by disease could temporarily restore itself. Families, however, often describe these moments as if the soul itself had pushed past the failing circuitry, reaching out for one last connection. There are also accounts of people who, after traumatic brain events, begin to see and hear things others cannot. While psychiatry may call these hallucinations, the consistency of certain visions across cultures is harder to ignore. Shadowy figures at the bedside, glowing apparitions in moments of danger, voices that guide or warn. In many traditions, these are not symptoms, but signs that the mind's usual filters have been damaged, allowing the unseen world to bleed through. One chilling case involves a young woman in rural Japan who suffered a high fever and a brief coma at age 17. When she awoke, she began describing vivid visits from her grandmother, who had died years before. These encounters were not dreamlike. She reported the exact scent of her grandmother's incense, the texture of her kimono, even warnings about future events that later came true. Doctors found no brain damage, but the experiences persisted for years, shaping the young woman's life in ways she could never fully explain. Some researchers have speculated about the pineal gland, a tiny structure deep within the brain often called the third eye in mystical traditions. Though science recognizes it as the producer of melatonin, regulating sleep cycles, esoteric teachings claim it can awaken perceptions beyond the five senses. Under certain conditions, trauma, meditation, altered states, the gland may flood the brain with chemicals that dissolve the boundaries between the physical and spiritual. Of course, the skeptic's voice is always present. Many so-called paranormal experiences can be explained by misfiring neurons, stress-induced visions, or the brain's remarkable ability to construct vivid realities from incomplete information. Yet, even the most skeptical minds struggle with the sheer volume of accounts that resist explanation. What makes the paranormal mind so unsettling is its unpredictability. It can appear in moments of deep meditation or extreme crisis, in those standing at the threshold of death or those who have just been brought back from it. And once the threshold is crossed, even for a moment, life is never quite the same. This brings us to the most dangerous territory of all, cases where the mind seems to open itself not to comforting visions or helpful intuitions, but to something far darker. In the next chapter, we will step into that territory, where the line between the psychological and the supernatural blurs into something truly terrifying. Not all doors the mind opens lead to light. Some reveal corridors that grow colder and narrower with every step, until you realize you are no longer walking alone. Throughout history, there are countless accounts of individuals who, after tapping into extraordinary mental states, whether through trauma, meditation, or near-death experiences, begin to sense an uninvited presence. At first, it might manifest as fleeting shadows in the corner of the eye, a cold draft in a warm room, or the faint sound of someone calling their name when no one is there. But as days pass, the experiences deepen, becoming more tangible, more personal, and more hostile. One chilling example comes from a case documented in Eastern Europe during the late 1980s. A man named Marek survived a near-fatal car crash and spent 3 days in a coma. When he awoke, he claimed to have seen a place where time doesn't move, and a figure waiting for him there, tall, faceless, and wrapped in something that wasn't quite cloth, but seemed to swallow the light around it. At first, Marek dismissed the vision as a hallucination born from trauma. But over the next several months, he reported waking each night to find the figure standing closer, always in the same corner of his bedroom. His health declined rapidly, and by the time his family sought help, Marek was emaciated, terrified to sleep, convinced that if the figure ever reached him, he would not wake up. He died in his bed one winter night, eyes wide open. Such cases feed into a disturbing belief held in many cultures, that certain altered states of mind, particularly those that weaken the body or disturb the brain's natural barriers, can act as invitations. Shamans warn of spiritual parasites, entities drawn to the energy of the living, slipping through when the mind is most vulnerable. In psychological terms, these could be manifestations of deep trauma. But those who have experienced them insist they are external, independent, and intelligent. Modern paranormal researchers sometimes refer to this as the dark passenger phenomenon, an entity that attaches itself after a psychic event. Feeding on fear, isolation, and despair, victims often report a worsening pattern, intrusive thoughts that feel foreign, vivid nightmares in which the entity interacts with them, and an overwhelming sense of being observed even in crowded places. One unsettling detail emerges across multiple cases. The presence is rarely loud or overt at first. It is patient, almost strategic. It learns the victim's routines, exploits their weaknesses, and slowly erodes their will. Friends and family may notice changes in personality, withdrawal, irritability, sudden loss of interest in once beloved activities. By the time the victim realizes something is deeply wrong, the darkness feels woven into their thoughts, impossible to separate from themselves. Science attempts to explain these experiences as severe sleep paralysis, psychosis, or neurological misfiring, and in some cases, that explanation fits. But what troubles even the most rational observers is when multiple people, in different places and times, describe the same figure, the same progression, and the same outcome. This raises a haunting possibility. What if certain states of the brain don't just perceive reality differently? They intersect with another one. And what if that other reality notices us back? In the most extreme accounts, victims describe a final stage in which the entity stops hiding and begins to directly influence their waking life. Objects move in the house. Shadows crawl across walls in defiance of light. Whispers become voices, and voices become commands. At this point, the distinction between a haunted mind and a haunted home disappears entirely. And yet, perhaps the most terrifying part is not the entity's presence, but the thought that it might have been there all along, waiting for the right moment to step forward. What happens when the brain, in its quest to expand, opens a door it cannot close? That is the question we must face in the final part of this journey. Where science and superstition meet at the same cold edge, and the reflection in the mirror may no longer be our own. In the end, what remains is not the answer, but the echo. We have walked through the corridors of human intelligence, from its miraculous potential to its destructive extremes. From the scientific to the supernatural. And yet, despite all our searching, the mind resists being fully known. Perhaps it was never meant to be. The brain is both map and compass. Yet some of its territory seems to lie outside the boundaries of this world. It can create beauty that moves nations and horrors that break them. It can imagine gods and monsters, and sometimes, we are not entirely sure which it has brought into being. The most unsettling truth is that these forces, whether born of neurons or something older, are never truly separate from us. They move through our dreams, our decisions, our fears. They take the shape of genius, of madness, of visions too vivid to dismiss. They might be chemical illusions, or they might be visitors. But either way, they leave their fingerprints on the soul. In quiet moments, you might hear it, the soft ripple of thought that feels like it isn't yours. A flash of a face you've never met. The certainty that someone has just stepped into the room behind you. Most people dismiss these things. Some learn to ignore them. A few cannot. If the mind is a doorway, then every thought is a step closer to something on the other side. We may never know if that something is a deeper layer of ourselves, or if it waits for us in the dark, listening, patient, hoping for the day we finally look its way. And so we return to where we began, with a question that lingers like a shadow. When the mind echoes back, whose voice is it that answers?